Emily had always dreamed of a life beyond the small, dreary walls of the orphanage. The scent of musty blankets and the haunting sound of silence that often lingered between her and the other children. She had grown used to them. But deep down, she yearned for something more. Something she could touch, something she could hold onto with both hands, even if it was only for a fleeting moment. The orphanage, a crumbling building with rusted gates and sagging windows, was the only home Emily had known for 19 years. Yet on this particular morning, everything felt different. As she stood by the gates, taking in the scent of fresh air, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her chest. Today wasn't just any other day. Today, she was leaving. Sister Lorraine, the kind-hearted nun who had always looked after her and the other children, stood beside her, a warm hand placed gently on her shoulder. "You're ready, Emily," she said softly, her voice full of reassurance. "This is a good opportunity, and you deserve it." Emily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't know how she'd earned such an opportunity, but the job as a live-in housekeeper at Sullivan Manor, one of Boston's wealthiest estates, was hers. She had heard of the Sullivan family. Everyone had. They were not just rich. They were influential. The patriarch of the family, Richard Sullivan, was a real estate mogul, known for his sharp business acumen and cold demeanor. His mansion was something of a local legend, a sprawling estate that seemed as unreachable as the stars. And now she was stepping into that very world. The cab ride felt long, the driver silent and indifferent to her anxiety. The closer they got to the mansion, the more Emily's nerves began to twist. It wasn't just the grandeur of the place, it was the unknown. What would they be like? The Sullivans. Would they see her as nothing more than a servant, a cog in their vast machine of wealth? Or would they see her for who she was, someone deserving of respect, someone with a future? When the car finally stopped at the entrance of the manor, Emily couldn't help but stare up at the imposing white stone walls, their surface gleaming in the afternoon sun. Ivy crawled up the sides of the building like living veins, and tall windows seemed to look down at her like cold, indifferent eyes. The doors, grand and black, loomed ahead of her like a portal to a life she had never dared to imagine. The driver didn't wait for her to gather her thoughts before stepping out and unloading her small suitcase. Emily followed, her heart racing in her chest. As she climbed the grand steps leading to the massive doors, she tried to calm herself, reminding herself that this was the chance she'd been waiting for her whole life. She had worked hard to get here. She had earned it. The door swung open, revealing a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture rigid, and his eyes, a pale gray, seemed to assess her without a word. Emily had only heard stories about Charles Morton, the long-serving butler of the Sullivan family, and from the look on his face, she could tell the stories didn't do him justice. "You're the new help," he said flatly, his voice like ice. "Yes, sir. I'm Emily Carter," she replied, trying to sound confident, though her voice betrayed her nerves. Charles didn't acknowledge her greeting. Instead, he gave a curt nod and turned on his heel, gesturing for her to follow. "The Sullivans are demanding. They do not tolerate incompetence. You will work hard, and you will work with precision. Understand?" Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir." The tour of the mansion was cold and clinical, every room and hallway a maze of polished marble and expensive antiques. As Charles led her through the vast estate, his words echoed in her mind like commands rather than advice. "Dust the shelves here, polish the mirrors there, clean the floors with precision. The Sullivans expect nothing less than perfection." She nodded along, her mind reeling. She had never imagined such a place could exist, a world so far removed from everything she had known. The mansion was beautiful, no doubt, but it felt foreign. There was a coldness to it that unsettled her, a certain air of intimidation that was hard to shake. Over the next few days, Emily found herself working harder than she ever had before. Charles watched her every move, offering no praise, only criticism. If a glass was smudged, he would scold her in front of everyone. If a table wasn't dusted to his exacting standards, he would shake his head in disappointment. Emily pushed herself, determined not to falter. But despite her best efforts, the pressure began to mount. She could feel the weight of the mansion's expectations bearing down on her, and for the first time, she wondered if she was truly capable of fitting into this world. It wasn't just the work that was difficult, it was the atmosphere. There was an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air, a quiet unease that Emily couldn't place. The Sullivans were always distant. Richard Sullivan, the patriarch, rarely left his office, and when he did, it was as if he were a ghost moving through the halls. His wife, Celeste, was equally distant, her smile a perfect mask that never reached her eyes. Their daughter, Lily, was the only one who seemed to break through the icy exterior of the family, offering Emily a warm, albeit brief, greeting whenever their paths crossed. But it was the necklace that Emily wore, a delicate silver pendant with a single sapphire stone. That was the true mystery. She had inherited it when she was younger, though the details of how were always a blur. She remembered nothing of her parents, nothing of where the necklace had come from, but it had always been a part of her, the one tangible link to her unknown past. It wasn't until the third day of her service that everything changed. She had just finished cleaning the kitchen when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Richard Sullivan himself, the man who owned everything, the man who could change her life with a single word. He was staring at her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His gaze didn't waver, and for the briefest moment, Emily wondered if he could see through her, if he knew the secret she had buried deep within herself. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "That necklace, where did you get it?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. The question felt so out of place, so unexpected. She looked down at the pendant, her fingers instinctively brushing against it. "I've had it for as long as I can remember," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Richard Sullivan's face paled, and for a moment, it seemed as though the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "That necklace, it belonged to my daughter," he said, his voice breaking. In that instant, Emily's world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath her feet shifting in ways she couldn't understand. She had never known who her parents were, but could it be? Could this man be her father? Could this necklace be the key to unlocking the truth about her past? The room seemed to close in around her as the realization struck with the force of a thunderclap. This was no ordinary coincidence. This was fate, and it was about to change everything. Richard Sullivan's words hung in the air, a thick silence settling between him and Emily. She stared at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Her heart raced, and her mind scrambled to make sense of the storm of thoughts that suddenly rushed in. His daughter. The pendant had belonged to his daughter. She had always wondered about the origins of the necklace. She remembered vague flashes from her childhood, an orphanage worker telling her it had been left for her with no explanation. The memory was foggy, but the pendant had been her one constant, the only thing that had tied her to a past she couldn't recall. Now, standing before Richard Sullivan, it felt as if the universe had just tilted on its axis. "You said that belonged to your daughter," Emily repeated, her voice trembling. She didn't even know why she asked. It was almost as though she were trying to convince herself that she hadn't heard him wrong. That this strange moment, this impossible connection, wasn't a figment of her imagination. Richard's face softened, his stern demeanor faltering for the briefest of moments. He looked almost haunted. "It's not just any necklace," he said slowly, almost to himself. "It was a gift I gave her on her 16th birthday. It was meant to be a symbol of our bond, of our family. But the night she disappeared, it was the last thing I ever saw her wear. I couldn't find her. I couldn't even begin to understand what happened. She was gone, and with her, any trace of what had happened to her." The weight of his words crushed the air from Emily's lungs. She had no idea why she was reacting this way, but something deep inside her stirred. A deep, buried feeling that had always been there, always been waiting to be unearthed. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Richard stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with a new intensity. "Where did you get that necklace, Emily?" His tone had shifted from incredulity to something sharper, something more desperate. "I don't know," she said, her throat tightening as she struggled to breathe. "I've had it for as long as I can remember. It was given to me when I was very young. I've never known who left it for me." His gaze never wavered. It was as if he were searching her soul, trying to see past the walls she had built around herself. "You don't remember anything about your past?" he asked, his voice low, as though the very question held more significance than it seemed. Emily shook her head. "No. I was raised in an orphanage. I have no memory of my parents. No one ever told me about them." Richard's eyes widened. An orphanage. His lips moved as if to say something else, but the words never came. Instead, he seemed to retreat into himself, his gaze drifting toward the pendant once more. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Emily's mind raced with questions, with theories that seemed too wild to entertain. Could this man, this powerful, wealthy, distant stranger, actually be her father? Was she truly the lost daughter he had searched for, mourned for, all these years? But how could that be possible? The orphanage had never mentioned a connection to the Sullivan family. There was no indication, no paper trail, nothing that pointed to the possibility of Emily being someone of importance. She was just another orphan, another lost soul who had no place to call home. "I'm sorry," Richard suddenly said, breaking the silence. "I shouldn't have pushed you. This is all too much to process." Emily, still reeling from the implications of what had just transpired, nodded quietly. She didn't know what else to say. She felt as though she were standing at the edge of an abyss, staring down into a world she had never known but felt an undeniable pull toward. "Maybe we should talk to my wife," Richard added after a pause. "Celeste, she might have answers. She was there when Lily disappeared." The mention of his wife, Celeste, sent a strange chill down Emily's spine. She had met Celeste only briefly, and the woman had been polite, yet distant. There was a coldness to her that seemed to mirror the mansion itself. Emily had never thought to ask about the family's history, never imagined that she could be walking into something so deeply personal. But now it seemed that everything, the mansion, the family, the job, was somehow entwined with the mystery of her past. I think I need to know," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words had left her lips before she could even consider them fully, but they felt right. She needed answers. She needed to understand why she felt such an overwhelming connection to this family, to this house. Richard looked at her, his face conflicted, but after a long pause, he finally nodded. "Very well. We'll talk to Celeste. But you need to understand, this is difficult for all of us. My daughter, Lily, she disappeared nearly 20 years ago. She was my whole world. Losing her, it was like losing everything." "I understand," Emily said softly, though the truth was that she couldn't fully comprehend the depth of his pain. She hadn't lost a daughter or a family, but she had lost something that had gnawed at her for as long as she could remember. Richard led her through the massive halls of the mansion, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. They reached a large, ornate door, and Richard paused before knocking. "Celeste," he called softly, though the door was already partially open. "We need to talk." Inside, Celeste Sullivan sat at a grand desk, her back turned toward them. She was a striking woman, tall, elegant, with long, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders like a wave. Her posture was perfect, her movements deliberate, and yet there was something about her that unsettled Emily. A sense of distance, as if she were always just a step removed from the world around her. When Celeste turned to face them, Emily couldn't help but notice the look of recognition in her eyes. But it wasn't a warm look, No, it was something much colder. Something guarded. "Richard, what is this about?" Celeste asked, her voice smooth but laced with an underlying tension. "You've brought her here, to me, to tell me what?" Richard stepped forward, his face tight with emotion. "Celeste, we need to talk about the necklace. This woman, Emily, she's wearing it. The one I gave to Lily before she disappeared." Celeste's expression faltered for the briefest of moments. Her lips parted and her eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to process what Richard had just said. But then her face hardened once more, and she stood up, her tall figure casting a shadow over the room. This is impossible," Celeste whispered, almost to herself. "It can't be her." Emily stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the moment. It seemed as though Celeste's words were not just spoken in disbelief, but in something else, something deeper, fear, regret. "I need to know the truth," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Please, tell me what happened." Celeste's gaze flickered toward Emily, and for a brief second, Emily thought she saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or guilt. But before she could understand it, Celeste quickly turned her gaze away. "Truth," Celeste repeated, her voice now quiet, almost mournful. "The truth is not something you're prepared for, Emily, but you will know it soon enough." The air in the room grew heavy, each second stretching out longer than the last. Emily felt the weight of Celeste's gaze upon her, and yet it wasn't one of curiosity or warmth. It was something colder, more guarded. Celeste seemed to retreat behind a wall of composure, but Emily could see the faintest tremor in her hands as they rested on the desk. It was as if the woman was trying to keep her emotions locked away, but the cracks were showing. "I don't understand," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You say the necklace belonged to your daughter, Lily, but I don't remember anything, nothing from before the orphanage. I was just given this necklace, and I'd always worn it because it felt like it belonged to me." She paused, trying to find the right words to explain the gnawing feeling deep inside her chest. "But if it's truly hers, if it's a connection to your family, then why was I raised in an orphanage? Why have I been living without knowing any of this?" Celeste's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw something flash across her face, something like pain or perhaps regret. But before Emily could make sense of it, Celeste turned away, her gaze shifting to the grand windows overlooking the estate. "Because you weren't supposed to know," Celeste replied, her voice icy and distant, yet laden with something darker beneath the surface. "Because your existence was hidden, swept away in the shadows of a past no one wanted to remember." The words hung in the air like a cold gust of wind, leaving Emily in a state of confusion. Hidden. What was Celeste talking about? There was so much Emily didn't understand, and every word only seemed to raise more questions. Richard, who had been standing silent beside her, shifted uncomfortably. "Celeste," he said quietly, "this isn't the time for your games. You owe her the truth." Celeste didn't turn to face him immediately. Instead, she stood there, her back stiff, as though bracing herself for something. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, but still laced with that same bitter edge. "Do you think I wanted this for her?" Celeste's voice cracked, and Emily caught the faintest tremor in her shoulders. "Do you think I wanted to live with the guilt of what happened? To lose a child, to lose the one thing that meant everything to me? Do you think I wanted this secret to haunt me for nearly 2 decades? Richard stepped closer, his jaw clenched tight. "This isn't helping, Celeste. We need answers, not more cryptic words." For the first time since Emily had met her, Celeste's composure slipped. She looked back at Richard, her eyes clouded with unshed tears, but still, she fought to maintain her stoic mask. "You have no idea what I've been through, Richard. No idea what it was like to watch her slip away from me, to have her ripped from our lives, to have my world torn apart because of a single mistake, a mistake that should have never happened." Emily stood there, frozen, her mind racing to process everything that was being said. What was Celeste talking about? What mistake? It felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into a darkness she could barely comprehend. And yet, there was something compelling her to take the leap. She needed to understand. She needed to know the truth. What mistake? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. What happened to Lily? What happened to me? Celeste's gaze snapped to her then, and for a brief moment, it was as though the walls around her finally crumbled. The mask of indifference shattered, and Emily saw the raw pain beneath, a pain that had been buried for so long, it had become a part of Celeste herself. The woman's lips trembled as if the words she was about to speak were the hardest thing she had ever uttered. "I never wanted this," Celeste said, her voice breaking. "But it's time you knew, Emily. It's time you knew the truth about who you really are." Richard, who had been standing silently, moved to stand beside Celeste. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. "We never wanted you to be part of this, Emily. We never wanted you to know what we did." "Did?" Emily repeated, her voice rising in confusion. "What do you mean did? What did you do?" Celeste's shoulders trembled as she finally allowed herself to meet Emily's gaze. "We were part of something dark, something that neither of us could control. Lily wasn't just my daughter. She was your twin sister." The words hit Emily like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of her lungs. Twin sister. This woman was telling her that she had a sister, that she had been part of a family, one she had never known, one that had never told her the truth. She took a step back, her mind struggling to process the weight of Celeste's revelation. She had always felt like something was missing in her life, as if a piece of her soul was locked away. But this was unimaginable. How could she have a twin sister? How could she have lived for so many years without knowing the truth? Celeste closed her eyes for a moment, collecting herself before speaking again. "When Lily disappeared, Richard and I were destroyed. We searched everywhere. We spent years trying to find her, but we could never trace her. We thought she had been taken, kidnapped, maybe even worse. We were both convinced that the worst had happened." Emily's chest tightened as she struggled to breathe, her hands gripping the edges of the desk for support. "But I don't understand. If you thought she was gone, how could I be?" Richard stepped in then, his voice heavy with regret. "Because we didn't know, Emily. We didn't know the truth until years later. After Lily vanished, Celeste and I were both in denial. We couldn't face what happened. But the truth, the real truth, is that Lily wasn't taken. She was taken by someone close to us, someone who wanted to keep her hidden, someone who took her away and left you in her place." Emily felt her legs buckle, and she sank into the nearest chair, her head spinning. What are you saying? Are you saying that someone replaced me with Lily? That I wasn't meant to be me?" Celeste nodded slowly, her face a mask of anguish. "Yes, you were part of a plan, a scheme that neither of us wanted to be a part of. You were meant to stay hidden, Emily. You were meant to be raised away from us, so that we would never find out what happened." Richard clenched his fists, his jaw tight with anger. "We had no idea. We didn't know who was behind it. But now we have to figure out who did this, and why." Emily's mind was spinning, struggling to catch up with the enormity of what she was hearing. She was no longer just the orphan girl she had always known herself to be. She wasn't just someone who had never had a family. She was someone who had been part of a tangled web of secrets, of betrayal, of hidden truths that could shatter everything. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know where I belong." Richard looked at her, his expression softening with compassion. "You belong with us, Emily. You belong with your family. You always have." But as Emily gazed at him, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The truth had just begun to unravel, and there was so much more yet to be revealed. The darkness that had loomed over her life for so long was finally coming to light, and with it, the possibility of a future she had never imagined. But that future, Emily knew, would come at a cost. Because no one could escape the consequences of the past, not even her. The weight of Richard and Celeste's revelation hung in the air, suffocating everything around Emily. Her mind raced with a million questions, each one more impossible than the last. Could it be true? Could she really have been born into this family? And if so, why had she been kept away? Why had no one ever told her the truth? She looked at Celeste, searching her face for some sign that this was all a mistake. But Celeste's expression was unyielding, cold, distant, as though she had already accepted the cruel hand that life had dealt her. Richard, on the other hand, looked conflicted, torn between his love for Emily and the painful realization that his family had been shattered in ways he couldn't yet understand. The silence between them was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. Emily's chest tightened, her heart pounding in her ears as she tried to process everything. The woman who had raised her in the orphanage, Sister Lorraine, had never spoken of any family, never mentioned any ties to a wealthy family. She had simply given Emily the necklace when she was old enough to understand its significance, told her that it had been left for her, with no explanation, no details about her past. Emily, Richard finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to understand that the decision to keep you away from us, it wasn't our choice. It was something we were forced into, something beyond our control. Emily shook her head, trying to stop the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. What do you mean? Who made that decision for you? And why wasn't I told the truth? Why wasn't I ever brought home? Celeste, who had been silent until now, seemed to stiffen at the mention of the truth. She avoided Emily's gaze, staring at the floor as though trying to piece together a lie that had never been fully formed. There are things in our past, things we've buried so deep, that we can't just bring them up without risking everything. The world we lived in, your father's world, was never one that would have accepted you. Not without cost. Emily could feel her frustration mounting. Cost? What cost? What could possibly be more important than telling me who I am? Richard stepped forward, his eyes pleading. It wasn't about protecting ourselves, Emily. It was about protecting you. Your safety, your future. There were people, dangerous people, who wouldn't have hesitated to hurt you if they knew who you were, where you came from. The words left Emily stunned. People who would hurt her. She had never imagined that her life, her existence, could have been so entangled in danger. The world she had known, the small, cold room in the orphanage, the few friends she had made, seemed so far removed from whatever Richard and Celeste were describing. I don't understand, Emily said softly, feeling the room spinning around her. You're telling me that my entire life, everything I knew, was based on a lie. Celeste's face twitched, as though the question had struck her harder than expected. It wasn't a lie, Emily, she said, her voice trembling. It was a necessity. We couldn't afford to risk losing you. So we made the choice, a decision that would keep you safe. We gave you away, hoping that you would grow up outside the madness of the Sullivan world. Madness, Emily repeated, her eyes narrowing. You make it sound like I was some sort of secret to be hidden away. Celeste's gaze flickered with a trace of something. Guilt, perhaps. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. Instead, her lips pressed together, her face pale, as though saying it aloud would make it all too real. Richard took over, his voice heavy with regret. Emily, your mother and I were never meant to be separated from you. But there were people who didn't want you to be found. They were part of a larger network, a dark influence that had ties to your birth. Your real mother, Lily's biological mother, wasn't the kind of woman who could raise you in peace. She was involved in something dangerous, something far darker than we could have imagined. When Lily disappeared, we thought she was lost forever. Emily couldn't fathom what Richard was saying. She had heard stories about wealth and power, about how the rich played their games behind closed doors, but she never imagined it would touch her own life. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they didn't fit. She wanted to scream, to ask more questions, to demand answers to every dark corner of her life, but all she could do was sit there, paralyzed by the confusion that gripped her. "So what happened to me?" Emily asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "Why wasn't I raised here? Why did I have to live in an orphanage, struggling to survive, while you were all living in this mansion?" Richard looked away, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. When Lily went missing, we thought she was taken by someone from the outside, that she had been kidnapped. But over the years, we discovered something horrifying. The truth was far more twisted. Someone close to us, someone within our own circle, had orchestrated it all. They wanted Lily hidden away, and they used you, took you from your mother, and left you in a place where no one would think to look." The words sent a chill through Emily's bones. "Who?" she whispered. "Who did this? And why?" But Richard could only shake his head, his voice heavy with grief. "We don't know yet, Emily. We've spent years searching, but we still don't know who was behind it. We've been looking for answers, for a way to bring you back into our lives, but we're being washed. We've always been washed." The room seemed to close in on her. Emily could feel her breathing grow shallow, the pressure of everything becoming almost too much to bear. There was something so dark, so secretive about her past, something that could shake the foundation of everything she had known. For the first time in her life, she felt like a pawn in someone else's game. She wasn't just Emily Carter, the orphan girl who had been raised in a small, cold room. She wasn't just a maid in a wealthy mansion. She was a piece of a much larger puzzle, one filled with lies, betrayal, and a web of secrets that had been spun long before she had ever known her name. "I want to know who did this," Emily said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want to know the truth. I don't care who it is. I need to know." Richard and Celeste exchanged a look, something passing between them, an unspoken understanding. After a long silence, Richard finally spoke. "We'll find out, Emily. Together, we'll find out. But be prepared. The truth you're searching for won't be easy to hear. And once it's out there, nothing will ever be the same." The weight of his words hung heavily in the room, and Emily felt the full weight of the unknown pressing down on her. She wasn't just a lost daughter anymore. She wasn't just a maid. She was part of a legacy, a family tied to something much larger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Emily barely slept that night. The storm outside seemed to mirror the chaos in her mind. Thunder rolling through the sky, as if the heavens themselves were wrestling with dark truths. Every shadow in the grand mansion felt longer. Every creak in the wooden floors felt like a whisper of something unseen. The weight of what she had learned crushed her chest. She was not just some forgotten orphan. She was a stolen child, a missing daughter, a puzzle piece hidden from her own life. But who had done it? And why? She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in the mystery of her past. The idea that someone close, had orchestrated her disappearance sent chills down her spine. If her own father, a man as powerful as Richard Sullivan, had spent years searching and had still found nothing, then whoever had done this was not just cruel. They were careful, calculated. She needed answers. The first rays of morning light barely crept into her window when she made her decision. She could not wait for the truth to come to her. She would go looking for it herself. Emily dressed quickly, pulling on the simple uniform she had been given as a housemaid. It felt strange, putting it on now, knowing she was not meant to be just another worker in the Sullivan estate. She was supposed to be part of this family. But that had been stolen from her. Someone had taken those years, taken her name, taken everything she was supposed to have, and she was going to find out who. She moved carefully through the silent halls, the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on her. She thought of the necklace she wore, the one thing that had linked her to a past she had never understood. Her fingers traced the pendant absent-mindedly, a small cold comfort against her skin. She needed to start where all secrets were buried. The study. Richard's study was a place of power. She had only been in there once before, dusting the shelves under the watchful eye of Charles, the butler. It was a fortress of mahogany and leather, lined with books that smelled of old money and hidden knowledge. If there were secrets to be found, they would be there. She moved silently through the hall, her footsteps light against the thick carpet. She reached the heavy double doors and hesitated only for a moment before pushing them open. The room was dark, the faint scent of aged whiskey lingering in the air. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, and a massive desk sat at the center, a symbol of Richard Sullivan's empire. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. She didn't know what she was looking for. A name, a letter, a clue, anything. She started with the desk, carefully pulling open drawers. Documents, contracts, business papers, nothing unusual. Her fingers skimmed over the edges of files until one caught her attention. It was older, the edges yellowed with time. The handwriting on the tab sent a shiver down her spine. Lorraine Carter. Her breath caught. Sister Lorraine, the woman who had raised her at the orphanage. Her hands trembled as she pulled the file out, flipping it open. There were letters inside, letters from Richard to Sister Lorraine. The words were filled with desperation. Please, please, you must keep her safe. I will not risk losing her again. If they find her, they will not hesitate. You must understand this is the only way. Destroy this after reading. We cannot leave a trail. Emily's head spun. Richard had known where she was. He had been sending letters all along. But why hadn't he come for her? What had he been afraid of? She turned another page, and then she saw the name. Celeste. Emily felt as though the ground had been ripped from under her. The letters were not just from Richard. Celeste had written too, but her words were different. She does not belong in this family anymore. Let her stay where she is. Emily's hands tightened around the paper, her knuckles white. Her own mother had abandoned her. Not out of love, not out of protection, out of choice. She staggered back, the weight of the truth crashing down on her. She had to get out. She had to think. The study door creaked, and she froze. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Her heart thundered in her chest as she slipped into the shadows, pressing herself against the bookshelf. The door opened slowly, and in stepped Charles, the butler. His ice-gray eyes scanned the room, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he had seen her. But then he walked to the desk, his fingers skimming over the papers as if checking to see if something had been disturbed. Emily held her breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. After a moment, Charles turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Emily waited, counting the seconds before she dared to move. She clutched the letters to her chest, her mind racing. Celeste had known. She had sent her away. And Charles, he was watching. She had just stepped into a game far more dangerous than she had imagined. And now there was no turning back. Emily knew she had no time to waste. The weight of the truth she had just uncovered pressed against her chest like an iron grip. Celeste had deliberately pushed her away, chosen to erase her existence from the family. And Charles, the ever-present butler, was more than just a servant. He was watching, guarding the secrets of the Sullivan household. She clutched the letters against her chest and crept out of the study, her heart pounding like a war drum. Every shadow in the hallway seemed alive. Every corner held the potential for danger. She couldn't stay here. Not now. Not with this knowledge. As she reached the servants' corridor, she turned sharply and ran to her small room. The walls that had once felt safe now felt suffocating. She pressed her back against the door, her breath coming in quick gasps. She had to leave. She didn't know where she would go, but she couldn't stay here. Not under this roof, not while Celeste and Charles held such dark secrets. Emily pulled out a small bag and shoved in a few essentials. Her mind raced with questions. Who else knew the truth? Was Richard really innocent, or had he been complicit in all of this? And if Celeste had been the one to ensure Emily was left behind, who had stolen her in the first place? She had to find Sister Lorraine. The woman had been her caretaker, her only source of comfort in the orphanage. She had never spoken about the Sullivans, never given any clue that she knew the truth. But those letters proved she had known everything all along. Emily threw on her coat, stuffing the letters deep into her pocket, and cracked the door open. The hallway was silent, the mansion still asleep in the early morning hours. She slipped out and moved quickly toward the back entrance. Just as she reached the door, a voice sliced through the silence. "Going somewhere, Miss Carter." Emily froze, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Charles." She turned slowly, meeting the butler's cold, unreadable eyes. His face was still, his posture perfect, but there was something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. She swallowed hard. "I need to leave." Charles tilted his head slightly, his eyes flickering to her coat pocket. "I assume you found something troublesome." Emily felt the weight of the letters pressing against her side. "You knew," she whispered. "You've known all along." His expression never wavered. "Of course I knew. I was here when you were born. I was here when you disappeared. And I was here when your mother made certain you would never return." Emily felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "Why?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Charles sighed, as if he were explaining something to a naive child. "Because Celeste had always seen you as a mistake. You were never supposed to exist. And when you did, you became a burden, a weakness in a world that thrives on power." Emily's stomach turned. "I don't believe you," she said through gritted teeth. Charles took a step closer. "Believe what you want. But ask yourself this. If your mother truly wanted you, why didn't she search for you? Why did she let you rot in an orphanage while she lived in luxury?" Emily clenched her fists. "Because she's a coward." Charles chuckled softly. "Or perhaps she's just practical." She couldn't listen to another word. She turned on her heel and shoved the back door open, stepping into the cold morning air. She ran. Her feet pounded against the pavement as she made her way down the long driveway, the towering mansion shrinking behind her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She didn't stop running until she reached the Old Town District, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The orphanage was only a few streets away now, a relic of her past she had never expected to return to. As she reached the tall rusted gates, she hesitated. The building stood just as it always had, cold, empty, forgotten. She stepped forward and knocked on the heavy wooden door. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing Sister Lorraine. The older woman's eyes widened in shock. "Emily." Emily stepped inside. "We need to talk." Lorraine hesitated but then nodded, stepping aside to let her in. They moved to the small sitting area where Emily had spent so many lonely nights as a child. The same faded furniture, the same scent of old books and candles. She pulled out the letters and placed them on the table. "I found these." Lorraine's face went pale. Emily leaned forward. "Tell me the truth. No more lies. No more hiding. Who stole me? And why did my mother send me away?" Lorraine's lips trembled. "Oh, child. Tell me," Emily pressed. Lorraine took a deep breath, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "It wasn't just Celeste who wanted you gone." Emily's body stiffened. Lorraine looked down at her hands. "It was your grandmother." The word struck like a thunderbolt. "My grandmother," Emily whispered. Lorraine nodded. "Eleanor Sullivan. She was the one who made the decision. She believed that a child born outside of their carefully controlled legacy was a threat to the family's name. So she arranged for you to disappear. And Celeste, she let it happen. She didn't fight for you. She let them erase you." Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Her own grandmother, a woman she had never met, the true mastermind behind everything. Emily clenched her fists, the fury inside her building like a firestorm. "I want to see her," Emily said, her voice steady. "I want to look Eleanor Sullivan in the eye and make her answer for what she did to me." Lorraine's eyes filled with worry. "Emily, this is dangerous. Eleanor is a powerful woman. She controls more than you can imagine." "I don't care," Emily said. "She took my life away. I won't let her get away with it." Lorraine sighed. "Then you must be careful, because if Eleanor Sullivan knows you're back, she won't hesitate to make you disappear again." Emily set her jaw, her heart filled with resolve. She had spent her whole life in the dark, living under the weight of secrets she didn't even know existed. But now she knew the truth, and she was done running.